Okay, this video is about solving by completing the square. So this is very similar to what we did with completing the square. We just now need to end it differently, and there's no why. So as you know, the first step was to bring the 51 over, but it's already over, so we just need to put our spaces in. So we're going to take x squared plus 14x plus blank equals 51 plus blank. And now we need to fill the blanks, just like we did before. So 14 divided by 2 is 7. 7 squared is 49. Because it's not in the parentheses, we can add the exact same thing to the other side. All right, now we need to factor this. Well, it's going to factor to plus 7 and plus 7. And because we created this perfect square trinomial over here on the left, we created it so that it will always be the same thing in both parentheses. That's why we can write it x plus 7 squared. Over here, 51 plus 49 is 100. Once we get the parentheses by itself, we're going to take the square root of both sides. Over here, when you square square root the squared, it cancels it, and we just get x plus 7. On the right, when you take the square root of 100, you get plus or minus 10. Remember, every time you take the square root of a number, you get plus or minus. Now we have to solve for x. So over here, I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. So I get x equals, you're going to write the number you subtract first. So I have negative 7 plus 10. And then over here, I got negative 7 minus 10. So this factor simplifies to 3 and negative 17. Now, you could solve this equation another way. You could solve by factoring as well, but not everything is going to factor. So that is why we need other options. And one of the options is completing the square. All right, we're going to do the same thing on number 2. So the 40 is on the other side, like we need it to be. The problem is you can't complete the square if the leading coefficient is not the invisible positive 1, and right now it's 8. So I'm going to factor out the 8, and that's going to give me x squared. 16 divided by 8 is 2x plus blank, close my parentheses. Half of 2 is 1, 1 squared is 1, but because this is in parentheses, it's a little bit of a trick. It's not really 1, it's 8 times 1, which is 8. Okay, so now we've got 8, factor this. Okay, you can think about what multiplies to 1 and adds to 2, or you can just take half of 2, which is x plus 1. That's going to be x plus 1 squared equals 48. And we can't take the square root just yet because the parentheses isn't by itself, so we're going to divide both sides by 8. So we get x plus 1 squared equals 6. Now that the parentheses by itself, now I can take the square root of both sides. So over here, I get x plus 1, and the square root of 6, I can try and make a factor tree, but there's no pairs. It won't simplify. So I'm just going to put plus or minus the square root of 6. Now to get x by itself, I'm going to subtract 1. So I have negative 1 plus the square root of 6 and negative 1 minus the square root of 6. And we're done. Now, one like number 2 wouldn't factor, so that's why we want to make sure we have things like completing the square. Okay, over here, the 18 has got to move. So we know over here we're going to get negative 18 plus blank. But now we got to deal with the ones with the x's, and we cannot complete the square unless we have an invisible positive 1. So we need to factor out the negative 2. Negative 2x squared divided by negative 2 is x squared. Negative 12x divided by negative 2 is positive 6x plus blank. Okay, let's fill in the numbers. Half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. But it's a trick. We didn't really add 9. We added negative 2 times 9, which is negative 18. So when we simplify this, this is going to factor, well, what multiplies to 9 and adds to 6 would be 3 and 3, or half of 6 is 3, so x plus 3 squared. This is the same sign, so we add and get negative 36. Can't take the square root yet. We have to get the parentheses by itself. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2. So I have x plus 3 squared equals positive 18. Now that the parentheses by itself, now I can take the square root of both sides. So over here, I get x plus 3. On this side, I need to simplify the square root of 18, which would be 2 and 9 and 3 and 3. So I get plus or minus 3 square root 2. The pairs go on the outside. What's not circled goes inside. So now to get x by itself, I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. So the number I add or subtract from x, I'm going to write first. So I have negative 3 plus 3 square root 2 and negative 3 minus 3 square root 2. Okay. Number 4. Okay, again, this 3 has got to go over. So over here, I'm going to have -3 plus blank. But on the other side, I need to get, or I can't complete the square until I have an invisible +1. So I'm going to factor out the 3, and I get x squared. -12 divided by 3 is -4x plus blank. Close my parentheses. Half of 4 is 2. 2 squared is 4. But it's a trick. I didn't really add 4 because it's in the parentheses. I really added 3 times 4, which is 12. So over here I have the 3. This factors to x minus 2 squared, because half of -4 is -2. That's how we can do it so fast. -3 and 12 is 9. I cannot take the square root until the radical is by itself. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So on this side, I have x minus 2 squared equals 3. Now I can take the square root of both sides. And over here, I get x minus 2. Over here, square root 3 won't simplify. So I get just plus or minus the square root of 3. Every single time you take the square root of a number, you're going to get both positive and negative. So now to solve, I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So I get 2 plus the square root of 3 and 2 minus the square root of 3. Okay, we've got a few more to look at, and they're going to do the exact same thing, except on the other page, when we do these, we're going to take the square root of a negative number, which means we're going to have an I in there. Okay, so on number 5, excuse me, the 3 needs to go to the other side. So I have -3 plus blank equals, here the leading coefficient's an invisible +1. So I don't need to factor anything out. So I just have x squared minus 2x plus blank. All right, let's fill in the numbers. Half of -2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. But since it's not in the parentheses, I really added a 1. So I'm going to put 1 on the other side. So this gives me -2. And now I'm going to factor this. And it's going to factor to x minus 1 squared. The parentheses is by itself. On the last few, the parentheses wasn't by itself. I had to divide by something. But here, the parentheses is by itself. So I'm going to multiply both sides. Excuse me, not multiply. Take the square root of both sides. Over here, that just gives me x minus 1. 2 won't simplify, so I just get plus or minus square root of 2. But because I'm taking the square root of a negative number, I have to add the I. Now I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I get 1 plus the square root of 2i and 1 minus the square root of 2i. On the next one, I'm going to start by moving the 8 over. So I have -8 plus blank equals x squared plus 4x plus blank. Let's fill in the numbers. Half of 4 is 2. 2 squared is 4. I didn't have to change the number I added to the left because it wasn't in the parentheses on the right. So it really was just 4. So over here, I get -4 equals, this factors to x plus 2 squared. Because the parentheses by itself, now I'm ready to take the square root of both sides. The right side's easy. I get x plus 2. On the left, the square root of 4 is just plus or minus 2, but because there's a negative, I have to add an I. Whoops, and I wrote that goofy. Let's try that again. Plus or minus 2, but because of the negative, I have to add an I. So now to solve for x, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So I have -2 plus 2 square root I. I said that wrong, but I wrote it correctly. -2 plus 2i and -2 minus 2i. Okay, a couple more. On this one, number 7, I'm going to start by moving the 17 to the other side. So I have -17 plus blank equals x squared minus 8x plus blank. Half of -8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. Now my pen won't, right? Well, it's totally frozen. Hold on. What could I do to get it to write? I don't know. Okay, well, we're just going to talk through it. So we're going to add 16 to both sides. So over here, I'm going to get -1, and then I'll factor that. Okay, then you're going to take the square root of both sides. But again, remember, if you take the square root of of a negative number, you have to add the I. Number 8 is going to work just like the other ones, and that should give you enough to be able to work your way through it.